Okay, so welcome everybody here in the room. We can have today our first talk in English and a very great talk. We have David John Pleasance as a Commodore manager who was brought to us by AUX, Amiga User Group Switzerland. And I think you talked the first time about your story on Commodore, what you did there, but actually you were in Switzerland some years ago and even worked from Switzerland. And you're going to tell us the story about Commodore, you're going to tell us who you are, and then we're going to do a discussion, like we can ask him questions, he can tell many stories about the background, what happened to Commodore, what went well, what didn't went well, at least, otherwise we would have another discussion, and also about your books, which you have here, which tell the story from your side, but also from many friends of yours you made during Commodore time, who tell their story about Commodore stories. Now, I have still first a question. Who of you had just the C64? Just only. Okay, so only, not many. So who of you had an Amiga? And who of you had both? So it looks like we have a huge crowd, a little bit less that had both, but we have a huge crowd of Amiga fans and friends. And I guess all of you are members of this group or not, hopefully. At least there is some incentive to do so because they invited David John Pleasance. So I hand over the mic to you, and let's inform us about the story of Commodore.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for all coming. I really appreciate your attendance, and hopefully you'll get a little fun out of this. I first need to thank the guys from the Amiga User Group Switzerland for inviting me over here, and the fantastic hospitality I've had. So thank you guys. I really, really appreciate it. It's fantastic. Okay, I think the best thing I can do is to start with is just to give you some background of my career at Commodore, and then I'm going to talk about how Commodore started and then all the things that went wrong and so on. I joined Commodore in 1983, in June of 1983, and I was recruited to sell Commodore PETs into the retail market. My background has been retail virtually all my life, after being a professional musician, that is. But the interesting thing was that when I joined Commodore in the UK in 1983, I found out very quickly that Commodore never had a business plan, which is quite interesting because I was with them about 10 weeks getting ready to start my work selling into the retail market when I was told that Commodore is not going to produce any more PETs. So I was recruited really for no reason. Anyway, what happened was that I got moved to selling the Commodore 64, which had not long been released and was doing very, very well. And my role at that time, I was reporting to the Consumer Products Division sales manager, and I was looking after all the major retail accounts. That's all the multiples and so on. Anyway, with Commodore in the UK, I introduced a whole lot of new marketing ideas, including bundling Commodore 64s with all sorts of things and producing packs which were enticing. I don't know if you've ever thought about it, but trying to market a piece of plastic with some keys on is not actually the easiest thing in the world to market. So I decided not to sell computers, but to sell dreams. So we produced these packs with all the images of the games and, of course, productivity software. Very important to have that in there because that justifies the parent's purchase. It's obvious, really. Anyway, what happened was that when we sold the 64 in huge volumes, and then eventually the Amiga was released. Of course, initially it was the Amiga 1000, which was not my product. It was kind of an in-between product because it wasn't serious enough to be taken as a business product, and it was too expensive to be a games product, so it kind of fell in between the two stools. Anyway, once the 500 was released, that was really when I was kind of let loose, if you like. Anyway, as a result of the activities I did with Commodore UK, particularly what happened was the very first Amiga 500 pack pack we did was called the Batman pack. And I'll just fill you in on how that happened. I went to Ocean Software, who had just come back from Hollywood, having paid $1 million for the rights to use the name Batman the movie in their game. And I went to them and said, gentlemen, I want to give you a proposal that you'll either have the guts to go with, or you'll send for the men in the white coats to drag me away, whichever you feel is right. Anyway, what I proposed to them was that I was going to produce a pack which featured Batman completely. The fact that there was an Amiga inside was almost incidental. And the idea was, I said to them, I need you to give it to me for 2 months, upon its release, for 2 months before you sell it across the counter on its own. And I want to pay very little for it, and I only want to commit to 10,000 pieces. At which point they said, send for the men in the white coats, obviously. Anyway, they had a bit of a chat amongst themselves, and eventually they said, look, we've got a couple of concerns. They said, first of all, we think our dealers are going to be really upset if you have the Batman the movie game on its own in the pack for 2 months before they can get it. And I said, well, if this goes the way I think it's going to go, they won't be upset for very long, because they'll be selling a £400 product as opposed to a £40 product. Okay. They said, David, we've just paid $1 million. We estimate it's going to cost us another $1 million to make the game. So therefore, we've done all of our numbers, and we know how many we need to sell and how many we want to sell. And we're afraid that this activity will affect those numbers. And I said, well, bear in mind, I've got a much bigger marketing budget than you, and my marketing is going to be on Batman. And anyway, the net result was exactly as I predicted. The dealers were only upset for a couple of days, because then the Batman pack started to sell. They did 5 times their highest estimate of sales, so they were very pleased. And I didn't take 10,000 pieces from them. I took 186,000 pieces, because that's how many Amiga 500s we sold in 12 weeks. It's an amazing story. But anyway, as a result of that, I got made sales and marketing director in the UK. And then there was a vacancy came up for Commodore Electronics Limited, based in Basel in Switzerland, which was the holding company for the whole group of Commodore. And I applied for that job and was given that job pretty well straight away. And that was, for me, that was kind of my dream job, because it meant I was looking after 35 countries, the countries where Commodore did not have an operating subsidiary. So I was operating it in all the Middle East. Finland was one of my countries, Turkey, India, and it meant I was traveling all the time, which I love to do anyway. And I don't know if you know this, but there are 2 types of salespeople. There are hunters and there are farmers. I'm a hunter, I'm not a farmer. Anyway, I was at CEL for 2 years, based in Basel. But to be honest with you, I was hardly ever in Switzerland, because I was traveling all over the place. I never sold into Switzerland, by the way. It had its own operating subsidiary. Anyway, in 1992, I was sent to the States as Vice President of Consumer Products for the sales company. We used to call the American sales company sales prevention officers, because that's kind of what they were. Anyway, after I was there a year and there was a bit of a mess which I sorted out, and then I was returned back to the UK as Managing Director of the UK company. So that's kind of an overall background. So I think you can see I'm very well qualified to talk about Commodore, because I was working with Commodore at all different levels and internationally. Now, I just want to give you a quick background into how Commodore started. You probably know this, but anyway, there was a guy called Jack Tramiel, and he was rescued from Auschwitz a couple of weeks prior to his potential death by the American military. He was rescued, and the first thing he did when he could is he went to the States and he joined the military to say thank you for getting me out of there. He then ended up opening up a typewriter repair shop on the Bronx. And from that, he got into calculators, and he started to actually manufacture calculators. And eventually what happened was that the chip company that was supplying him realized that he was doing very well selling these electric calculators, and they weren't doing it themselves. So they stopped supplying him and started doing their own. So he ended up buying a chip manufacturing company, Moss Technology, just near Philadelphia. And one of the guys working for the Moss Technology was a guy called Chuck Peddle, and he had just developed a put-together-yourself computer called Kim 1. So Jack bought the company on the basis that Chuck came with it. I mean, you can't officially do that, but that was how the deal was done. So from that, they then developed the VIC-20, and then the 64. Now, the interesting thing is that the 64 was without question Commodore's glory days. But at the same time, it was also their demise. Why? Because there's a lot of conjecture about how many 64s were sold worldwide. I know the actual number, and the reason I know the actual number is because, which I'll come back to you later, is that we were doing our due diligence on looking to buying the whole of the worldwide assets, and we saw all the figures. They actually sold just under 27 million 64s, but they didn't declare a lot of it, so they didn't pay tax on it. That's the truth. Anyway, why was it Commodore's demise? Well, you can't suddenly make 27 million computers without a lot of finance. You know, you just have to have the finance. So Commodore had to look for external finance, and that's when he got Irving Gould involved. And I might, just as an aside, it's all in this book here, which I'm definitely promoting today. Once I asked Irving Gould how he made his money, because it was a very impertinent question, and I knew it was. And if you don't mind, I'm going to give you the exact wording he used. And he said, David, he said, I took the best piss of my life. What on earth are you talking about? He said, David, he said, I was sitting in the Four Seasons restaurant in Manhattan with some group of friends, which is where everybody used to be at that time. So I needed to go to the toilet. He said, so I walked into the toilet, and within a minute or two of me walking into the toilet, this young guy came in, and the guy's going, effing company, I can't effing believe they're so effing stupid. And he was really ranting and raving. So Irving said, oh, why are you so upset? This guy said, well, he said, I've just brought a proposition to my company, fantastic proposition, and they've turned it down, and I can't believe how stupid they are. So Irving said, okay, well, what is the proposition? And this guy said, well, he said, you know how things get shipped around the world by sea? He said, it's a nightmare if you're shipping barrels of oil, wheat, electronics, how they pack it all into the ship, it's an absolute nightmare. So these guys have come up with a system of containerization, 20-foot, 40-foot containers with vehicles built to carry them, cranes, ships built to carry them. He said, and I brought to my company the rights to the container system for the USA, and they've turned it down. And Irving said, you've just met your man. And that's how he got into and became a very, very rich man. Which I find an interesting story in itself. Anyway, let's get back to Commodore and what went wrong. Well, as I said in the beginning, Commodore never ever had a business plan, which sounds bizarre, but it's absolutely true, which is why they kept coming up with things like the +4. Suddenly I got 10,000 +4 shipped to me. What the hell do I do with the +4? It was a non-product. They just kept doing all these, and the reason for that was that they kept hiring new head of engineering. So that person would come in and say to their engineers, what are you working on? I'm doing this. Oh, don't do that. Stop that. Do this. So there's loads and loads of projects that never got finished, loads of them. And so that in itself is a big no-no for a company to not have a business plan. Do you know, they never once came to us and said, what does the market need? What product do you need? What price point do you have to meet? Never, ever once, which is kind of crazy. The other reason why Commodore inevitably went bankrupt is that they never, ever had external auditing. Now, what does that mean? Well, let me give you an example. The general manager of Commodore Netherlands, a guy called Bernard van Tienen, he's passed away now, so I don't mind talking about him. He used to, every general manager's meeting, he used to brag that he had not met his target, he had not met his figure, so he would invent invoices, put product on a truck and send it on a journey for 4 days, so it was out of the quarter and then back in again at the next quarter. So he's recording it as sales, collecting his bonus and his commission, but the sales were never there, and the money was never in the bank. So Commodore was looking at it and saying, we've got this, it wasn't there. I'll give you another example of how bad that is, and that was when I went to America. I know I'm jumping ahead, but it's important. When I went to America in 1992, January of 92, I couldn't understand. Commodore was not selling anything to anybody. So I called my team and I said, why aren't you selling anything? And they said, oh, we're not allowed to sell into the retailers. What do you mean you're not allowed to? We're not allowed to. Why? We don't know. So I said, well, I've got to get to the bottom of this. So that I made appointments to see all the retailers. The very first appointment I made was with Sears in Chicago. I can remember it like it was yesterday. I was on the 12th floor of their tower building. And I sat down with my rep, Steve, and there was, I think, 10 people from Sears around this boardroom table. So I introduced myself, told them about my history. I'd been with Commodore, I think it was 8 years or something, 9 years, whatever it was. And I said, gentlemen, I'm here to try and get things moving because clearly something's not working. And I'll give you my honest, work, and all I ask from you is the same. So I said, would you mind telling me why you're not paying your bill? And they said, well, it's simple, Mr. Pleasance. I said, we're waiting for you to take all our stock back. And I said, well, I've been in Commodore 8 years or 9 years, and I've never known Commodore to be a lending library. The next thing you know, they push a piece of paper across the boardroom table to me, and it was a letter signed by Jim Dion, who was the president of Commodore Inc., the sales company in America, and it was a sale or return agreement, which we never did. But he'd recorded all these sales, got his bonus, and they were stuffed to the gunnels with a product that they could never have sold in a million years. Do you know what that product was? CD TV. No, I'm not joking, but professional people had trouble selling it because it was so ahead of its time and it wasn't user-friendly. There's absolutely no chance on God's earth that Sears could have sold it because they're hard pushed to ring up something on the till and put it in a plastic bag. That's the truth of the matter. But I was stuck there. Suddenly, here I am faced with this president having signed this document. And what it meant was that I had to take back all the CD TVs, and a lot of them were not even saleable again because they were a bit on display and everything else. But that was the agreement that was signed. Now, I had to think very quickly on my feet. And in the end, I said to them, look, gentlemen, you should be selling the Amiga 500. That's the product that's flying out. I said, if you give me an order to the same value of the product I'm taking back from you, the Amiga 500s, I will give you your own pack, Sears special pack with your own software in it, which is how I managed to get over it. Now, the only reason I'm telling you that is because you realize then that Commodore had believed it had, I think it was almost $750,000 that I ended up taking back from all the retailers, all the big retailers, that Jim Dion had sold on sale or return. So they believed they'd got $750,000 worth of sales, which weren't real sales. So can you imagine running a business when you don't know how much money you've got in the bank? I mean, I still find that unbelievable. And you've got a guy. What happened is, I'll go back again, the best way I can do this, is that, as I mentioned before, Irving Gould came in, was an investor in Commodore, and he ended up with 22% shares, and Jack Tramiel, the founder, ended up with 7% shares. And clearly they didn't see eye to eye on certain things. One of the things was Irving Gould was a tax exile in 3 countries. He was a resident of Canada. He had residency in the Bahamas, and obviously time in the USA. He was not allowed to stay in any one country for more than 3 days, otherwise he'd be liable for tax. So he was using the company jet, it was called a pet jet, to travel all the time. And Jack had a go at him about it, and he said, if you don't like it, leave. And anyway, that's one of the stories behind Jack's leaving. So Jack left, and I think it was about March, April of '84. Now, what happened then, of course, was that after Jack left, there was this void, and Irving Gould was bringing in all these different people as, presidents of the company, and most of them had no idea and no real interest in the business. I mean, people coming in from Coca-Cola, and the first thing they did was to cut costs. And like in the UK, we had a purpose-built assembly plant and premises in Corby in the UK. We bought a 10-acre site. We got a big grant from the government and built an assembly operation with warehousing and distribution and marketing sales all under one roof. He closed it down, because that saved money. So on the books the next year, it looked like they'd made money, but it's just a short-term solution. Anyway, what happened was that after Jack left, he'd heard about El Toro, which was a company that was designing the Amiga, went to them. They were in serious financial trouble, which is typical of any new venture, I guess. And he did a deal with them, and he gave them $500,000 and said, if you don't pay it back within, I think it was 45 days, maybe 60 days, I'll own the company. They took the check. He then went and bought Atari. And he bought Atari for $1 because they were in so much debt. He was supposed to pay the debt, but you never do when you buy these sort of companies. So there he thought he'd got the Amiga and he'd got Atari to sell the Amiga. He went back to El Toro and he said, right, you're my company, you haven't paid back. And they said, no, we've sold to Commodore. How can you do that? And they gave him his check back. They never, ever cashed his check. And as I understand it, I could be wrong, but as I understand it, that check is on the wall in Leonard Tramiel, Jack's son's office. That check is up there as a memento of what might have been. Anyway, so let's talk about the real downside. We had this guy come in called Mehdi Ali. The best way I can describe him was that he was a Pakistani Danny DeVito. If you can picture Danny DeVito with the Pakistani image, that was Mehdi. And Mehdi was one of these people that, well, his cigar was bigger than him, I'll put it that way. And he had no desire to try to understand the business, no desire whatsoever. And he made decisions, and his hiring ability was abysmal. For example, when I went to America in 1992, the first thing I did was to walk into engineering, because I know without the engineers we haven't got a business. So we had 7 Amiga engineers, who I think between them had 3 or 4 junior engineers working for them. We had 40 PC engineers. In 1992, and nobody in their right minds would make their own bloody PCs. It didn't make any sense whatsoever. The reason why we had 40 PC engineers was that Mehdi had just recruited a new head of engineering, a guy called Bill Sidness, who'd come from IBM, and his claim to fame was the PC Junior, which is considered the biggest flop in world history. And he'd given 40 jobs to his mates. I mean, that's an example of how Commodore was mishandled. Same thing, at the same time, Mehdi hired a head of manufacturing. I don't even know this guy's name. He hired this guy, head of manufacturing, who said, CD32 will manufacture in the Philippines. And I thought to myself, the Philippines, we are not selling anything into the Far East. Nothing. Why in your right mind would you have a manufacturing facility that was 5 or 6 weeks by sea from your core business? It didn't make any sense. Anyway, we found out why. this guy wanted us in the Philippines because the company he was working for before was based in the Philippines, and he had a mistress there. That was the whole reason why we built the manufacturing plant in the Philippines. I mean, these are things that, they're all in the book, but they're almost unbelievable, but they're true. Now, also in the book, to be honest with you, I'd never considered myself to be any kind of an author. I really wasn't. But when I came back into the industry, which is really in 2015, when there was an Amiga 30 event held. First one was in Amsterdam, and then a couple of months later in Germany. And I was invited to be a speaker, and I had no idea why, because it had been all those years since I'd left the company. Anyway, I realized then that I started to tell the stories to people, and they all said to me, you should write it down, it's interesting. I said, oh, no way, no way. Anyway, to cut a long story short, eventually, I think it was about 2019, I decided I'll try to write something. And I wrote my story, and I read it back, and I hated it. I thought, this is more like a story about David Pleasance than it is about Commodore. And then I thought, well, actually, it can't be anything else, because this is through my ears and my eyes. But for me, it wasn't enough. I wanted to give the whole picture. So I invited contributions from people like Dave Haney, who was one of the engineers there. People like R.J. Michael was one of the designers of the Amiga. Beth Richards, she was an engineer that was working on the CD32 product for the A1200. And all people, Peter Kittle from Commodore Germany, and they've all written chapters, and I didn't change one word from their chapters. So this book has got all their versions of what was happening and why it was happening. So it's a very fulfilling and genuine read, why it's called The Inside Story, because it truly is that. And there are lots of things that you won't believe. I'll give you one more example. What I'm trying to do is to whet your appetite to buy the book. I'll give you one more example, right? Signosis Software asked me if I would take Mehdi Ali to them. They wanted to talk to him. Now, bear in mind that I had got development kits for the CD32 into all the major software publishers in the UK. Not outside of the UK, but they were the major ones, and they were all developing games specifically for the CD32. So anyway, Signosis said, can you bring Mehdi up? I said, I'll try. So I dragged him up there to Liverpool, kicking and screaming. And the mental block, just bear with me a second. Ian Hetherington, sorry, I just couldn't remember his name for a second. Ian Hetherington was their technical co-managing director. And he said to Mehdi, look, he said, I've been working on your development kit for the CD32. And I just want to say, if you do this little tweak, and you do that, and you do this, and you do that, the other, you'll have a much, much better product. Now, most people would have said, look, I'm not a technical person, and you're talking to the wrong person. How about I get Dave Haney or one of the engineers to call you, and we'll talk it through. Mehdi didn't do that. He got the hump. He thought he was being talked down to. And anyway, cut a long story short, I had to drag him out. It was really bad. The net result is that not long after that, Signosis got bought by Sony, and Ian Hetherington became head of PlayStation Europe. And he was offering us the technology free. And Mehdi turned it down because of his attitude. I mean, his ignorance, really. Awful. I mean, that's absolutely 100% true story. So you can see why, in a way, it was destined to happen, things that went wrong with Commodore. One of the little snippets that you might find interesting is that Commodore UK were the strongest business. We never did sale or return or anything like that. And that is why after the parent company went bankrupt, we kept trading for 14 months. Every time one of the subsidiaries went under, we got their stock and carried on trading. Colin Proudfoot was my co-MD, the financial heart of Commodore, and we tried worldwide buyout of Commodore. It's another story which I won't bore you with. But anyway, in terms of there was an IP that was shared between Commodore UK and Commodore Netherlands. I'm not sure what it was, something insignificant. But the liquidator of Commodore Holland asked us to go over and just decide how we were going to handle this particular thing. And while we were there, he said, oh, by the way, guys, have a look at this. And he slid a piece of paper to us. And it was an expense claim from Bernard Van Tienen. And it was for an establishment called Yab Yum, which apparently was the most high-profile brothel in Amsterdam. And it was an invoice for $275,000 they'd put through the company. So why did Commodore go bankrupt? Work it out for yourselves. But it's all in here. Now, before I go on to the next project, any questions that you'd like to ask me about what I've talked about so far?
Yes, any questions? So raise your hand quickly because we wanted to do it also a little bit interactive with your questions.
Maybe I have one. Is there any regret at your side that you could have done something else and save some situation or do something better?
Totally. As I mentioned just before, Colin Proudfoot and I decided that we believed that we could do a lot better job of running Commodore. And so we got together with Coopers and Lybrand, auditors, and with their help, we raised $50 million in order to buy the worldwide assets of Commodore, because we really felt that we had a good business plan. We'd never have raised $50 million if we didn't have a good business plan. But what happened was that we got cheated out of it, because 50% of our investment came from a Chinese manufacturing company called New Star Electronics, who up until that time, they had been illegally manufacturing and selling Sega and Nintendo products into China. But the government had told them they had to get legit. So they came to us, and the idea was that they were going to be half of our investment and our manufacturing arm, which would have been absolutely the most fantastic thing, cheap manufacturing with a partner, you know. But what happened was that Petro Tichenko, who previously was at Commodore, then went to ESCOM, along with Bernard Van Tienen. The crooks kind of joined together. And he went to, 2 days before the auction, he went to New Star Electronics and lured them away. Said, don't pay 25 million, come with us and we'll give it to you for nothing, sort of thing, which they never intended to do. So we lost half of our investment. And everybody said, well, hang on, that still meant you had $25 million. Yes, of course we did. However, you don't honestly think that any supplier would give us credit terms after they've just been burned by Commodore. We're going to have to pay our way for a period of time. And Colin Proudfoot, who was an absolute financial genius, we sat down and worked out. We reckoned 7 months, 2 weeks, and 2 days, we would be in a position to be able to afford to run ourselves. And so we could not spend $15 or $16 million and then lose the other money in the next 2 or 3 months. There's nobody in their right minds would consider doing that. So yes, I regret immensely that we weren't successful, because it would have been a whole different story now, believe you me. Anybody else?
Any other questions before we go to the other books?
No?
No, fine.
Okay, I'd like to introduce you to this trilogy of books. I can't reach it from here. Which initially this started out, to be honest with you, once this was finished, I thought that's it. I've done my bit writing books. But what happened was that I got interested in what was happening after Commodore's bankruptcy. ESCOM only had it for just over a year when they went bankrupt. So I thought, I wonder if I can do some research and find out what's happened to Commodore's trademarks, its IPs, its patents, and logos and things. So I decided I wanted to write a book. And I got in touch with a few people who I needed to get information from, and one of them was Trevor Dickinson, who I don't know if you know, but he's a very huge Amiga fan, and he's produced the 5000 and the 1222 is coming out soon. Anyway, I contacted him and he said, David, I've got loads of material already, so how about we co-author? So we thought, okay, there's going to be one book. And at the time, I thought I wanted to write about the vultures who were coming in and trying to get the trademarks and the logos for. A lot of them wanted getting it for cheap and make a quick buck, and others were more serious. And at the same time, the new technology that was coming out was the vampire board. So I come up with the concept of Vultures to Vampires, which is a perfect name for the book. But we didn't realize that it would end up being more than one book, because when we started doing the research, there is so much material, it's incredible. So ultimately, we have 3 volumes. Volume 1 covers from 95 to 2005. Volume 2 covers from 2005 to 2010. And Volume 3, which has only just come out, takes you right up to 2023. And if you're interested in what happened and all the different technologies that people were wanting to develop around the Amiga technology, all sorts of different products, none of which came to market. It's bizarre. But essentially what you've got here, with these 4 books, you've got 4 years of research and you've got 40 years of Commodore history. And I mean, honestly, if you're interested in Commodore and you like a good read, it's all genuine. It's no fiction in this at all. And I'm really, really proud of these books because well, it's taken a lot of my life. Anyway, all these books are available downstairs. I'm happy to sign them for you. They're probably worth less if I sign them, but anyway, I'm happy to sign them for you. And that's kind of as much as I want to say, but I'm sure there must be more questions. It's got to be.
Do you have any insights about the AAA chipset?
Yeah, what do you want to know? Everything. Well, the thing is that, like as I said before, they kept changing the head of engineering, and he kept going along and saying, "What are you working on? I'm doing this." No, I don't do that. We'll do something else. So there's lots and lots of projects that never got finished, and in fact, Beth Richard, her chapter in this book is about all these things that never got released. It's an interesting read in itself. But if you don't have a business plan, you're going to get this. You're going to get skipping from one thing to another to another to another, and none of it makes any real sense. You know, if you don't have a business plan, how are you going to get there? If you don't have a roadmap, how are you going to get there? You know? But what I will say about another thing about this book here is that. The CD32 was the first product in the 12 and a half years I was at Commodore where they'd actually planned it properly. They'd planned to develop it. They'd planned for us to get software done, which, as I said, I had all these development kits in all the software houses. It was all planned, and it was planned, the release date and everything was all sorted. And then Commodore got into serious financial trouble. I mean, they'd always been in trouble, but they got into serious financial trouble. And Mary Ali came to me and he said, David, I want to launch the CD32 in September. And I said, you're mad. You're absolutely crazy. What are you talking about? He said, I need the extra sales, he said. I said, Mary, we've got A1200s on order right through Christmas. Every major retailer is ready to take the orders in. I said, if you launch the CD32, you will kill the 1200. Oh, I want both sales. I said, you won't get it. So the other thing, Mehdi, is that we don't have the software. So if you launch it in September, and there's no software ready for, all you're going to get is ports from the 1200, and people are going to go crazy. They're going to say, this is ridiculous. I've got CD32, and it's the same software that's on the 1200. But he wouldn't listen. And everything I predicted came true. Although we did the worldwide launch, we launched CD32 from the Science Museum in London. Fabulous launch. And I must tell you, you'll love this story. Just before the launch, there was an article, in PC Week, and it was an interview with Tom Kalinske, who was the worldwide president of Sega. And this this journalist interviewed him, and in the interview he said, "Oh, what about 32-bit CD-based games consoles?" And Tom Clancy said, "Oh, it can't be done. If anybody could do it, it would be Sega, right?" Which, of course, was in print. So when I read that, I went, "Thank you, there is a God," you know. So we were able to use that quote because nobody knew that we were obviously very close to producing it. And then what happened was, about a week before the launch, and I'm not kidding, a guy rang me up and he said, "David, you won't remember me," he said, "but we've done business before." He said, "We've got poster sites all over the UK." And he said, "You know how we work. You book a site, you pay 50% up front, and then you pay the other 50% on the week that your campaign commences." He said, "I've got 3 poster sites in central London that the guy's already paid half the money on, and he's not going to go ahead with them. If you want them, you can have them pay the 50%. Oh, and by the way, one of them is right outside Sega's head office." So I don't know if you know this, but Sega advertising on television used to be this good takes ages. To be this good, and spin the word ages around, takes Sega. So we put a big billboard up that said, to be this good will take Sega ages, because they'd said so. And that was right outside their head office. It's so funny. Yeah. In fact, about a couple of weeks after that, sometime in November, I think it was, we used to have an industry dinner in the UK where we raised money for charity and that kind of thing. And everybody was there. And we were all, I mean, to be honest with you, it was a fabulous industry because it was like a cottage industry. I mean, Nick Alexander, who was the MD of Sega UK, you know, he and I would be enemies in the daytime, but we'd have a drink in the bar at night because it was that kind of situation. And we were all at this industry dinner, and I got 2 or 3 tables, and so did he. And he walked over to my table and he said, "A bit close to home, Mr. Pleasance, a bit close to home." And I said, "Well, Nick, where needs must, where needs must." And never another word was said. They were seething. They were so angry. But they'd said it themselves. Their head up, their president, worldwide president, said they couldn't do it. So there you go. Anything else?
Any other question? Yeah.
Just in a few quick words, what is the gist of it, of the IP story? So where did it go? What has happened with logo and
Buy the books.
Okay.
Because it's so. I mean, it's 3 volumes. That's how much information there is. If you stop by my stand and say, have a look on the back, you'll see all the companies that were involved during the period of time. And honestly, we didn't know there was going to be 3 books. It was never in our wildest dreams. But when you start to research, you see all these different companies that had different technology ideas to do with what the Amiga could do. And I mean, it's heartbreaking, really, because for some reason it was almost like it was jinxed. Nothing was ever going to kind of work, you know. But it's worth the look. I promise you. I can't possibly go through it all. There's just far too much in there. Anybody else?
A final question somewhere?
No, I don't think so.
No, so very quiet audience at the moment. No
Yeah.
questions in. So I'd like to ask you one question about the following talk which you have about the demo scene, like people making demos. What was your relation to them? How did you sponsor them? Were you against them because they cracked games in the beginning? So what was the relation to this still vibrant scene in Switzerland of the demo scene?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, actually, because my claim to fame is, if anything, is that I was the very first hardware company to join FAST, the Federation Against Software Theft. And so a lot of people said to me, when as I explained, I joined to sell the Commodore PET, and then I got involved in the 64. And what happened was that one of my customers, it was a company called Spectrum Distributions, nothing to do with Spectrum Computers, just what their name was. And the managing director of that company came to me in, I think it was November of '83, and he said, "David," he said, I've got my flight and my hotel booked for the Las Vegas, the Winter CES in Las Vegas in January. He said, no, I can't go. He said, I forgot that he owned a place in Marbella. And he said, I promised my family I was going to take them. He said, would you like my ticket and my hotel? Because it's all paid for. So I immediately went to my boss, but to the managing director of Commodore at that time, and asked permission because I wouldn't do anything. Anyway, the bottom line is I went to Las Vegas in January of 84. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because I was staying in a hotel where a lot of the software companies from the UK, who I didn't know, were all there. And they were kind of jibing me the first breakfast. And they were saying, oh, you're soon going to get your comeuppance. So what are you talking about? They said, oh, Commodore, you're a faceless company and you don't get involved with this, but you're all going to regret that, Luke. I said, why? And they said, because MSX is coming. And the Japanese, they know how to do things. And I said, okay. I said, but you know they're going to fail, don't you? And what are you talking about? I said, MSX is going to fail. And they said, we don't know what you're talking about. I said, okay, look at it from this point of view. I said, let's say you are Dixon's, who have, the biggest group of retail shops. I said, they're going to look at MSX and they are going to say, right, as I know it, there were 15 MSX companies, Toshiba and Pioneer and et al. I said, and Sony, I said, if you look at Dixon's, they will probably range 5 MSX. They'll probably range Sony and maybe Pioneer, their own brand, Seisha, whatever. They'll range maybe 5. Now, all of these guys are selling the same spec product at £149. I said, but they won't all get ranged. There'll be 2 or 3 of these brands that will not get ranged. Do you think they're going to go away? Of course they're not. The first thing they're going to do is say, come back and say, look, you wouldn't range me at 149. How about £129? Or how about £99? They're not going to go away because they can't afford to. So that immediately disrupts the market. You can't sell the same product. Everybody's selling at different prices. But and that all came true, of course. But what I didn't know was that MSX was actually going to be incompatible. There was loads of incompatibilities between the MSX brands, which added to their demise. Now, the only reason I'm telling you this is because with the message I was getting from the software company was that we, as Commodore, did not get involved with software people. When I immediately picked up on that, which is why I went out of my way to start to get to know the software companies, and eventually we did all these bundles using their software and so on and so forth. And one of the things I did was to join FAST. Now, I know we were the first hardware company ever to join FAST to prove that we were supporting the software companies. So that's kind of an aside to what you're saying, but the demo scene, it's very difficult because the demo scene people create incredible things, and they're always trying to outdo each other in what they can produce, which is fantastic. And so, yes, we do want to support them, but you can't support them in any material way. Can you understand that? You can't, not like a software company that's selling to the market, and you can help them to promote their products and so on and so forth. There's nothing you can do with demo sceners who are doing it as a hobby, and it's all very it's all real and it's all important, but you can't. There's no way you can support them. You can't help them. That's a mutual benefit, and everything that you do in life has got to be collaborative. It's got to be win-win-win. You have to do that. So I hope that answers your question. I agree with them and I support them, but not in any financial sense.
Okay, great. Yeah, you're gonna hear about the demo scene later. So if there is no additional question, I would say thanks a lot for your talk and for your information. And don't forget, he's still there for bilateral questions where you can ask him and tell the story about Amiga. And of course, you can watch a lot of Amigas or Commodore computers there. And thanks again to the Amiga User Group Switzerland to bring him here and have fun and enjoy the event. We're going to start at I mix always the time up, so I'm gonna look at the time at 5 o'clock, so I don't say 4 o'clock again. I have some mixes of time. With the demo scene, André Jos will explain the story of how the demo scene became a cultural heritage in Switzerland and in other countries. And he also will show some demos recently, not only Amiga and Commodore, but that you have a glimpse of it, what kind of culture this is. So after a short break, which we open the windows to have better air because it's hot in there, I wish you a nice day and see you in 10 minutes or later.
Thank you. Thank you very much.